Obviously, a lot of breaking news that we are following, but also some stories that have been impacting people over the course of the past little while. My next guest introduced a bill today to hold bureaucrats accountable. We will get to that in a few moments, but first, let's bring in Republican Congressman Rich McCormick, who is with me now. Perhaps I just want to start it. Obviously, this is very much a developing story as it relates to President Biden dropping out of the presidential race. You have the likes of House Speaker Mike Johnson now calling on the president to resign entirely and basically give the presidency to Kamala Harris based off of the fact that that's presumably who they are going to be running against. But from a congressional perspective, you've worked with President Biden, whether it be some of the pieces of legislation that he's tried to pass, whether it be some of the congressional accomplishments that members of Congress like yourself want to accomplish. What do you think it would mean if someone like Kamala Harris became the president in terms of dealing with her, and perhaps how is that different than dealing with someone like President Biden?
Well, sadly, I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference in the big picture because the Democrats have become resolute. If you look at the divergence of the parties in the last few election cycles, it used to be, and I remember the first time I really started paying attention to politics, and I always knew I was a Republican, but actually paying attention to a debate. It was Kerry versus George W. Bush. And I watched that, and I really thought, man, there's hardly any difference between the two parties. I mean, they were very similar, just timelines, how much money they could spend. And I came away thinking, it really doesn't matter who the president is. But since then, the parties have diverged dramatically. If you look at what each party represents and what they're trying to get to, whether you think each party is getting more extreme, which I could make a case for that, but if you look at one party that literally thinks that the government's the answer to your questions or even your ability to get something done, when you say the government gets to determine what's moral, what's not moral, what's medically relevant and what's not. No, don't leave it to your doctors. Have the government determine what you're going to get for a vaccination, if you're going to be able to travel, if you can keep your business open or not, who you hire, who you fire, who gets to go to what schools. Do you trust the government to be in charge of your life and to bail you out when anything goes wrong? Or do you want to have the freedoms, your inalienable rights, to succeed in a country which pretty much anybody can succeed in as long as they have a little drive, a little work ethic, a little bit of talent, because we've seen it from all over the world. And I've seen it from people from the Far East, India, Africa, Europe, South America. It doesn't matter where you come from. This place can make you a millionaire in one lifetime. When you don't speak the language, you don't look like other people, you don't have any connections, but you have the opportunities, and the government stays out of the way. So there's the diversion of ideas. And I don't think that Kamala changes anything from Joe Biden as far as their policies go. And that's what we're fighting over right now.
Do you think the Republicans might have a harder time going against her than President Biden just because they can't necessarily use the cognitive argument as an example now? Obviously, President Biden was 81 years old, and that was kind of something that was very apparent that Republicans could draw attention to, whereas now they don't have that, as kind of baggage to carry. As a matter of fact, now Democrats, I just, saw today, for example, a lot of senior Democrats in the House and in the Senate, they're reversing it, saying that former President Trump, as an example, has cognitive issues. How do you, as a Republican, overcome that?
Well, first of all, if you look at Trump, he hasn't lost a step. I spent an hour and a half with him in his library. The guy remembers everything. He is sharp. I don't care how old he is. His cognitive functioning is high level. I mean, this guy remembers things that most doctors forget. But that aside, I've always said this shouldn't be about personalities. A lot of people don't like Trump because of his personality. A lot of people say, oh, it was about Joe's cognitive decline. I've always said, every single interview, I would say, yes, he's in cognitive decline, but that's not the problem. The problem is the ideas that he's trying to sell. Now, maybe Ms. Harris will be able to sell the idea better because certainly the president could not sell anything. It didn't matter if it's Ukraine or the border or debt or energy or education, all the things that I think are failed policies in the Democratic Party. Maybe she'll sell it better, but quite frankly, the ideas of the problem to begin with. And whether it's her or anybody else, they still have that fundamental problem with the 80%, 60 to 80% rule of things that people want when they're on the wrong side of history when it comes to the border, crime, debt, energy, and education, those things that people really agree with the Republican Party on. And you can talk about things that they don't agree with us on. That's fine, too. That's on the table. But I'd love to have those discussions and divest from this idea of it's about one person. It's about the ideas that those people represent.
And let me switch gears a little bit here because, of course, there was the assassination attempt on former President Trump on, just a Saturday evening. A lot of people were perhaps looking forward to the Republican National Convention. It still happened, but it was upended in certain regards just because of what took place there. There was senators like Marsha Blackburn, John Barrasso, who actually chased down the director of the Secret Service at the RNC demanding answers. She was at the Capitol just today for some testimony. I know you also just introduced a bill as it relates to stopping bureaucrats, and a lot of people frustrated right now, as an example, with the Secret Service director, with her what is seemingly kind of an inability to answer some of the questions that members of Congress had. In a moment like this that is so consequential for the United States, how do you as legislators, demand accountability from some of these people who are meant to be in their jobs and in their capacities to fight for the American people?
Oh, great question. That's why this Stop the Swamp Act is all focused. The timing couldn't be better. Ms. Cheadle is a perfect example of how she comes before Congress, and people from both sides of the aisle are answering her questions she will not give answers to. It's not about her secret. This stuff is going to come out. But being accountable to the people, the reason she won't be transparent, because she knows she did wrong. You can't have 4 times more people protecting the president's wife than you have protecting a presidential candidate who was the president of the United States, who obviously is much more controversial, much more enemies. That is wrong. Now, she won't admit to that stuff. She won't talk about it. She won't talk about what happened wrong specific to that scenario. That is an egregious lack of accountability for the American people. And quite frankly, I've seen it on multiple people. It doesn't matter if it's Mayorkas or anybody else, Garland. When people from both sides of the aisle are being stymied in answering on accountability, that's what hearings are for, is to give people accountability. And when they won't answer the questions, they should be held accountable. They should be thrown out of their job. And this shouldn't even be a question. If you can't do your most basic premise, which is answer to the people, you shouldn't be there.
And just to conclude with this, how much of this has to do with getting politics out of what is supposed to be some of these nonpartisan agencies, and how can you actually go about accomplishing that, given that it seems every part of Washington, D.C. in some way is kind of ridden with the back and forth kind of drama-based politics, so to speak?
Well, for far too long, we've seen the bureaucracies become more and more powerful. They basically make laws without voting on anything, without having the purse strings. They think that they can, instead of interpreting what laws we pass, they're literally creating their own laws. It doesn't matter if it's the DEA or the ATF or the, you name it, any bureaucracy, when they start being overbearing and oppressing the people, creating their own legislation, if you will. That's why the Chevron case was so important. That's why other Supreme Court cases were so important, to get rid of that idea that bureaucracy should run the government. And that's why it's really important that when somebody doesn't answer the mail, when they can't justify what they're doing, that they be thrown out of their position. I don't care, Democrat or Republican, I really don't care. This is about accountability for the people.
All right, we will leave it there. Congressman, thank you so much.
My pleasure, thank you.
That is Republican Congressman Rich McCormick. We'll be right back.